Uh-oh.
In her last two fights. Good way hitting him from that way down.
Welcome to the motherfucking relay. We're covering today's top boxing news.
Okay, we'll start with this. Per boxing scribe Fernando Sabatini, they inform me that Mayra Moneo of Uruguay versus Carolyn Dubois will finally be happening on June 15th in London. Moneo will represent the lightweight interim title of the World Boxing Council, while Dubois will defend her IBO title, though let's be honest, the only trinket, the only title of any worth, of any value, is Mayra Moneo's WBC interim title. That is a segue to the full title that Katie Taylor still holds. Being honest with you, I'm surprised that she hasn't vacated it already. It doesn't look like she's going to be returning to the lightweight division after all these years.
No.
Why would she? She's undisputed at 140. She's going to fight Amanda Serrano at some point later on this year.
Drop the belt.
Now, as it pertains to a Carolyn Dubois versus Mayra Moneo fight, I told you weeks ago, months, that this is what Carolyn was going to do, that she wasn't going to fight Beatriz Ferreira for the IBF title. No, sir. She'd go another route, presumably the WBC route.
You will recall that Carolyn was targeting a fight with Rhiannon Dixon for the newly vacated IBF title, but then she found out that Rhiannon was going the WBO route, at which point it became about Carolyn Dubois versus Beatriz Ferreira. And I say it all the time, Carolyn does not keep the energy for Beatriz Ferreira that she keeps for Rhiannon Dixon and some other fighters.
She knows here and now that is a very risky fight.
Even if it is for the IBF title.
It's more trouble than it's worth when there are other alphabet titles you can pursue that will not require you to take on another beast, another animal like yourself. Yes, Carolyn Dubois is one of the best unbeaten up-and-comers in the lightweight division today and arguably in the entire sport. She has a bright future, but Beatriz Ferreira, she could upset her plans if Carolyn and her team are not careful. Thus, they've gone in another direction. The direction of Uruguay's Mayra Moneo, who's more experienced as a professional than Carolyn is, but she doesn't have Carolyn's decorated amateur background, and that's what they're relying on.
That Carolyn is more talented, that she's got a higher ceiling than Mayra does, even if Mayra's got more fights and more rounds in the bank.
This is what I always thought would happen. So Mayra Moneo is an aggressive style fighter, a mid-range to inside combination puncher, throws flurries, very scrappy and very aggressive.
She's never been stopped.
And she does have one recorded loss, but
She's never been stopped.
normally Carolyn Dubois is the aggressor. Normally Carolyn is the one coming forward and throwing bombs, throwing combinations. I feel like this fight will allow her to pull some of her other tools out of her tool bag. That is, unless she elects to fight fire with fire.
She might.
If she doesn't, this will allow Carolyn the opportunity to use some of her other skills, her other abilities, her other physical attributes, because she's quite fast on her feet, athletic, very strong.
Mayra's gonna come forward. You know she's gonna come forward. And if you know that, you know you can set her up.
It's highly unlikely that Mayra Moneo will be the one that breaks character here, because Mayra, God bless her, she's not as adaptable as Carolyn Dubois. No, Mayra in all likelihood is going to stay in character and stay aggressive, which means Carolyn won't have to find her so she can set her up, walk her into a big shot, create a bit of space between herself and Mayra.
If she can handle the pressure.
You shouldn't think of this as a developmental fight or a bring-along fight, because Mayra is a top contender. She is one of the better fighters at this weight and one of the more highly ranked fighters at this weight. So this really isn't a bring-along fight. This is an acid test. Can Carolyn Dubois handle the pressure?
She can dish it out well enough. She can dish it out, but can she take it?
I think she can, though. Ultimately, there's only one way to find out, and the fight is set to go down June 15th in London, presumably on the undercard of Chris Billum-Smith versus Richard Riakporhe II. Elsewhere in the world of boxing, unbeaten up-and-comer Bruce Carrington believes that he can expose Naoya Inoue in a fight that will be discussed for decades. Bruce Carrington is one of the sport's most promising prospects, and the featherweight known as Shushu is just waiting for a breakthrough opportunity to prove himself. The Brooklyn-born Carrington will get another shot at showing his potential in a homecoming fight against Enrique Vivas on June 8th. The fight will be the co-main event on ESPN for the card headlined by Xander Zayas versus Patrick Teixeira at the Madison Square Garden Theater in New York, otherwise known as the Hulu Theater. This is a big step up for me, Carrington told Boxing Scene. It's the best thing for me at this stage of my career to put the world on notice and let them know who I am. The co-main event slot shows that I'm made for big fights. This will help me grow and get comfortable.
Currently, Naoya Inoue, the 4-division champion, is at 122. Bruce Carrington is up there at 126.
Now, in a very general sense, we do have to start entertaining the idea that Inoue will one day move up to 126 pounds, though when he does, will Bruce Carrington still be there? Because Bruce is a young guy. His body is still growing.
That's the caveat.
Bruce, who says, the co-main event slot shows that I'm made for big fights. This will help me grow and get comfortable. I show up under pressure. I want to cement myself in the featherweight division. I want people to look at me and say, that is a guy to watch out for. By next year, any of the world champions are feasible for me. Next year, I will take over and establish myself as a world champion. I have enough star power to be headlining by next year as well. I have a good fan base. I am hoping that's the case.
You know what I like about Bruce Carrington? He's not one of these youngsters from the previous cycle of unbeaten up-and-comers that starts automatically likening himself to Floyd Mayweather.
No, he's not like them, and he's not like that. It seems to me that young Bruce is trying to be his own man, carve out his own legacy. That's why I don't begrudge him his ambition that one day he hopes to face Naoya Inoue. Though whether or not he will is another matter, because like I said, Inoue's at 122 right now. Bruce is at 126. He's trained by Kei Karoma and is signed to Top Rank and is already number 4 by way of the WBO, number 7 by way of the WBA, and number 12 by way of the IBF. He has been a professional boxer for only 3 years. Carrington, 27, can solidify his status by being the first to stop Vivas, a feat he accomplished against the last 2 fighters he faced, Bernard Torres and Jason Sanchez. Both encountered their first inside-the-distance losses to Carrington. The durable Vivas has previously lost decisions against former title challengers in Ruben Villa, Joet Gonzalez, and Eduardo Baez. Vivas is a great opponent. He comes out to you non-stop like a Terminator, said Carrington. He's a really tough guy. But I love fighting tough guys and exposing how tough they're not when they're fighting me. I am not understanding him, but I'm super confident that I will get him out of there. I'm definitely gonna break this guy down and stop him. I'm an old school fighter with a menacing mentality. I go in there looking to put the hurt on and dominate in dramatic fashion. And not just get a win, which is true. You know, if you've seen Bruce in action and you've seen his knockouts.
Oh yeah, he's a pleasure to watch.
I want to leave my opponents broken and mentally scarred from fighting me. That's what separates the boys from the men and the champions from the great icons. So in that previous era, you saw a lot of young fighters that were coming through, likening themselves to Floyd Mayweather when they were anything but. They weren't like him when he was the same age that they were. No, these were a bunch of outside cutie pies.
Finesse fighters that were fighting like old men.
And that's what I like about Bruce. Bruce doesn't seem to liken himself to anyone. He's just doing his own thing, off his own name.
And he's a hell of a lot more entertaining to watch than some of those guys are.
Carrington has grandiose plans to win titles from 126 up to 147. He believes that winning a featherweight title will make him a more attractive dance partner to Inoue when and if the super bantamweight champion makes his move up to 126. That is the fight that a lot of people would want to see for Inoue at 126 because of how our styles match up, said Carrington. It's going to be a match made in heaven. I'll stay at 126 pounds and wait for him to just have my time. that can be one of those big fights for me in my career that I can see happening. I'm ready for him right now. I've been calling him out, but not in a disrespectful way.
So here's what it is.
I figure that Naoya Inoue has between 3 and 4 more fights left at 122 when you think about it.
Oh.
May end up fighting TJ Doheny in his next fight. Then after that, he might fight Sam Goodman. Then after that, he might fight MJ Akhmadaliev. If he makes it through all 3 of those fights, what might happen is Junto Nakatani, his countryman, 3-division champion, he might move up to 122, fight Inoue for the undisputed.
That'd be a huge fight in Japan.
And that's roughly 3 to 4 fights at 122 pounds before it becomes about moving up to 126 and potentially fighting Bruce Carrington if he's still there.
Because he's 27 years old, his body is still growing, and at some point it could become difficult to keep making 126.
I'm ready for him right now. I've been calling him out, but not in a disrespectful way. I'm a competitor and 100% believe in my abilities in the ring, and I know what I am capable of. I see what he's lacking, and I know how I can expose it and easily capitalize off of it because of what I have in my arsenal. It's just that simple, and I want my chance whenever the right time comes. I obviously know it's a little premature right now, but when the time comes, I'll be ready. It will be one of those big fights that people will remember and be talking about till their grandchildren for decades.
Is the fight realistic?
My honest opinion is that it's too soon to tell. It's far too soon to tell if those 2 fighters will ever meet, but like I said, I don't begrudge Bruce his ambition because this is what you want in an unbeaten fighter.
What would the conversation be if Bruce were shying away from opponents like that? What would the conversation be if Bruce were shying away from those kinds of fights? Well, that ain't encouraging.
I can't tell you how Bruce Carrington stacks up against Inoue because it's too soon to tell. And Bruce, he's got his own acid tests and his own developmental fights that he needs to be in. He hasn't fought for a full world title yet at 126, so he's got to get through all of that before it becomes about Inoue. We'll see if he can.
There were 4 different champions at 126.
He can pick one and go, and if he can keep making the weight, he can have some unification matches. Maybe he becomes undisputed there.
Maybe.
But the bottom line is, I don't begrudge him his ambition. That's what an unbeaten up-and-comer is supposed to say. That's the attitude they're supposed to have, and that's a good sign. That's a good thing. And finally, in men's heavyweight news, Eddie Hearn has insisted that Anthony Joshua's next opponent on September 21st at Wembley is not decided yet, though admitted Daniel Dubois is possible. An all-British fight for the world title would definitely be massive at Wembley, but no decision made yet. A few days ago, there were rumblings that they had already entered into negotiations, but, it's just a few days ago. I don't imagine that just a few days later, the fight is finalized.
No.
Not yet, but this is a stadium fight, and you figure that for a stadium fight in the United Kingdom, Daniel Dubois would be ideal. More ideal than, say, Zile Chang, even though Zile Chang would be a solid choice as well. I don't know that that's as much a stadium fight as a Dubois fight. What's interesting
Is the expectation.
even now that Deontay Wilder has suffered his 4th professional loss and Tyson Fury, he has suffered his first, there's still a burden that they put on Anthony Joshua that perhaps they don't put on some other fighters, that it's either got to be Daniel Dubois or Zile Chang. It's got to be one of those 2 because nothing else will suffice. The Fury fans, what remains of them, and the Wilder fans, and what remains of them, they seem to be coming out and they're on edge.
They're still calling AJ a hype job.
These people are still out there, still taking the piss out of Anthony Joshua for losing, but for losing to who? Usyk, the same man who just beat Tyson Fury?
Losing to Usyk makes AJ a hype job. What's that make Tyson Fury?
Bear in mind, Anthony Joshua has easily dispatched opponents that Tyson Fury struggled with. Guys like Otto Wallin, who Tyson Fury couldn't stop, but AJ did. Guys like Francis Ngannou, who Tyson Fury, once again, couldn't stop him, but AJ did. Made it look easy both times.
And now what the public is demanding is for him to take on either Daniel Dubois or Zile Zhang. Dangerous opponents, risky opponents, solid choices, the both of them.
Though it does seem like they are expecting quite a bit from someone they regularly call a hype job, a manufactured champion.
Why would you expect so much from him?
I thought he wasn't any good, so you're expecting the guy who ain't any good to do all the heavy lifting at heavyweight. Is that how it works?
It's funny.
Though given the decorum and the location, what we're talking about is a stadium fight. And if it's gonna be a stadium fight, yeah, it's gotta be somebody good. Personally, I think it has to be Daniel Dubois.
They could sell out a stadium with that.
I don't think there are any alternatives to those two guys right now. Not right now, it's gotta be either Daniel Dubois, ideally Daniel Dubois, or Zhilei Zhang, because nobody wants to see a Parker rematch.
There may be a precedent for an Andy Ruiz rubber match since they're 1-1 with each other, but that's not possible since Andy's fighting in August and this is supposed to go down in September.
He's not available. Neither is Deontay Wilder. Deontay's out of the picture. He just suffered another loss, another one.
He's done.
I feel like it's got to be Daniel. It has to be Daniel. And if it's not Daniel, then it has to be Chang. Interestingly enough,
I thought that card was going to be the second installment of the Matchroom versus Queensberry tournament. I thought.
Apparently it's not. Apparently it isn't. Eddie Hearn has revealed that he and Frank Warren are eyeing another Queensberry versus Matchroom 5-for-5 event in October or November, either in Saudi Arabia or the United Kingdom. The concept worked so well, and number 2 will be even bigger.
Try to win at least one fight this time, Eddie.
We shall be back to settle the score. This past weekend, they didn't put any scores on the scoreboards. None of Eddie's boys put up any points for Matchroom. Could they do better the second time out? That depends on who they choose to represent them. I've said it before. In the second installment of this tournament, one fight that would be ideal would be the Sky Nicholson versus Raven Chapman fight.
Sky's with Matchroom, Ravens with Queensberry. They're supposed to be fighting very soon.
Sky's supposed to be fighting right here in the US of A in July on the undercard of Jaren Ennis's next fight.
Right?
She's fighting Diana Vargas, and we'll see how that goes. But that allows her enough time to have that fight, win that fight, recover, recuperate, then show up in either October or November for the tournament.
For Raven.
Do you think she beats Raven Chapman?
No, I don't.
But that is one fight that could end up being on that show. Yet another fight that could end up being on that show is Sugar Nunez versus Kakache, newly crowned IBF champion Kakache, who won the title from Joe Cordina.
Super featherweight title.
Sugar Nunez became the mandatory challenger to the IBF title by traveling abroad and taking on Shavkat Rakhimov, who he knocked out in what was an all-action shootout. And I think that he would do to Kakache what Kakache just did to Cordina. He'd out-muscle him and out-hustle him from the inside out. I have Sugar Nunez winning that fight if it does end up being on that show.
But what's interesting
is where before I thought that Anthony Joshua's next fight would headline the Matchroom versus Queensberry tournament, they appear to be two separate events. Anthony's fighting in September. The tournament is supposed to go down in either October or November.
And don't forget that Artur Beterbiev versus Dmitry Bivol has been rescheduled to at or around that same time. Then in December, Alexander Usyk is supposed to be fighting Tyson Fury again.
It's already turned out to be a hell of a year for the sport of boxing, and it's only getting better. They seem to have very big plans for the fall and winter months.